We at RBNTV want to take the time to remember the families who lost loved ones during Hurricane Dorian. Pain like this isn't easy, but our prayers are that God will continue to strengthen you and that His peace surrounds you during this time.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. I am your host, Dr. Joretta Carey, welcoming you all aboard as we go full steam ahead. Joining me today are my guests, Mrs. Keldra Pinder and Mr. Troy McIntosh. Keldra Pinder is a spiritually grounded wife and mother of four, an educator, author, and speaker. She is most passionate about helping others navigate the trials of life, as well as youth development. She holds a master's degree in curriculum and instruction and has taught from kindergarten up through the 12th grade level. She has been an educator for the past 18 years. Recently, she released a riveting and well-received memoir about Hurricane Dorian entitled The Water Has Come, and she is presently working on other novels. Keldra is also the founder of Revolution Academy, a virtual school that will launch later in the year. Additionally, she enjoys pageantry, reading, and traveling, and encourages everyone to seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, so that all good things may be added unto you. Welcome to the show, Mrs. Keldra Pinder. Mr. Troy McIntosh obtained his Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering with a focus on transportation engineering from Morgan State University in June of 1996. He has a 19-year background in roadway design, traffic management, highway engineering, and transportation planning. He began his career as a highway designer for the city of Baltimore in 1995 and was later promoted as assistant manager of the highway design section. In 2004, Mr. McIntosh accepted the post of transportation engineer and planner for the road traffic department here in Nassau, Bahamas. Troy McIntosh is currently the Deputy Director and Manager of City Maintenance and Management Department of the Grand Bahama Port Authority. As Deputy Director, some of his responsibilities include overseeing the implementation and maintenance of public works, landscaping, and beautification projects for the city of Freeport and Lucaya, maintaining undeveloped land, managing a public helpline hotline for the Grand Bahama Port Authority services, and also assisting with the management of the port group's hurricane plan and manager of GIS section. Mr. McIntosh is also well known for his collegiate and professional athletic achievements. Notably, He's the first Bahamian to run 44 seconds in the 400 meters. He is also an Olympic bronze medalist in the men's 4x400-meter relay at the 2000 Sydney Olympics. Mr. McIntosh is also married and has 4 children. Welcome also to the show, Mr. Troy McIntosh.
Good morning, Miss Carey, Dr. Carey, and good morning, Bahamas.
Good morning. Dorian, 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 a phenomenon like no other. It was a superstorm for the ages, and it is one that the people of the Bahamas, particularly the persons residing in Grand Bahama and Abaco, will never, ever forget. And so today, my guests will join me as we explore the dramatic impact that Dorian, this child of the sea, has made on the northern Bahamas, in particular, Grand Bahama. Dorian came with a fury and water more than one can ever imagine. And so, in this episode, we will explore the nature of Dorian in what I call come hell or high water. And so my first question is directed to Mr. McIntosh, and he will give us some insight on how his work as city manager ties in with hurricane season.
Yes, so Dr. Carey, you know the Grand Bahama Port Authority is responsible for regulatory aspect of the city of Freeport as well as for the maintenance of the city of Freeport. And so with that, the latter part, dealing with the maintenance of the city, there's several things that we have to do, my department have to do to ensure that we're ready, we're prepared. And so as it relates to the maintenance of the city, you're looking at, we deal with our drainage system, tree trimmings. We also work with our partners for issues that they may have, GB Power, BTC cable, to ensure that the city is prepared. By way of GIS, we also assist our partners with information that they may want. And so I've been here since 2009. And so I didn't get the fortune to experience Francis and Jean, but I'm aware of those. I was in Nassau at the time. And so when we look at approaching systems that will impact the city of Freeport, NEMA, along with the other partners of the government, get together and discuss possibilities, impact possibilities, areas of concern that we need to be aware of and address, or whether or not they have been addressed, so that post-hurricane, we can then obviously get on the ground running with our department, looking at damages, damage assessment throughout the city, and then making decisions as to what needs to happen.
Awesome. So we can definitely see where your department has a key role in our hurricane preparedness strategies and, of course, preparation. So, as it relates to flooding associated with hurricanes, what has been your experience over the years in Grand Bahama, and how was Hurricane Dorian in particular different?
It's my experience has been quite interesting, as you know, and we all know, no two storms approach alike, approach similarly. They're all different in their aspect. And so, for example, Matthew, when Matthew came, Matthew was more wind and rain. And so the city experienced tremendous amount of structural damages, and which obviously, you know, we recovered from rather quickly. As we go back to 2004, 2005, with, excuse me, Gene and Francis, excuse me, Gene and Francis were both wind and rain. And so um, we learned and we realized that, okay, these systems can bring both. And so when one is coming on the other, obviously that's something we have to pay close attention to as residents, but also as a regulator and managers of the city. And so with Dorian, though, Dorian was a phenomenon, 100-year storm, as we look back at it now and begin to understand dynamics of Dorian. One of the key things that I think a lot of persons did not pay attention to over the years, we paid attention to the category of the storm, the strength in terms of wind factor of the storm. Most of us did not pay attention to the storm surge, which in recent years, from my perspective in GBPA, we've been trying to push the understanding to residents and all of our partners. You must pay attention to the storm surge and begin to explain to residents what that means. We've said to residents, if you get a normal or a heavy rainy day and water's puddling in your roads or in your neighborhoods, that is something to be concerned with. And if you hear a surge of 8 foot or a storm surge of 12 foot or 20 foot are projected, these are things you need to understand, because what that means is 8 feet or 15 feet above sea level is what you're looking at. In some cases, 2-story, 3-story buildings is what is going to happen, particularly if a storm is coming from the north side of the island. The north side of the island, you can go out for a mile and the water is pretty shallow. And so that is an ideal situation for surges coming from that side. So the water pretty much push up from the ocean. And when it gets to the shallow ground, it elevates or rises to a level in which the wind of the storm can sustain it. And so because the elevation on that side is pretty low, what you find is the storm surge can come in a lot further because there's no barrier on the north side to stop it other than the house. The trees are there, but they do very little to impact the path of a storm surge. And so Dorian were more so concerned with the fact that there was storm surge. And a lot of persons felt with Matthew several years earlier, we were able to get through Matthew, but not realizing Dorian brought a different phenomenon. Not only did it sit for a long period of time, but it brought storm surge of 20, 30 feet in some cases. That's one. Two, we had two king tides that occurred with Dorian, which obviously when you have king tides, instead of your water rising 3 feet, in some cases in some cases it's even higher. And then added to that, you have a storm surge. And so areas that would have flooded in Matthew or Francis or Jane, we saw a surmountable amount or areas that never experienced any sort of flooding inland. In some cases, almost a mile inland on Vallejo in Freeport here. And so it caught a lot of persons off guard, simply because, like I said, I don't think persons understood what the storm surge meant and what its potential impact could have been and was in the case of Dorian.
Yes, I totally agree, and I can relate to what you have said, Mr. McIntosh. Even though warnings of the surges were given, I think it was unimaginable, really, in the minds of Grand Bahamians. As Bahamians, we are accustomed to riding out storms, and like you
Correct.
mentioned, Francis, Jane, and so forth. But nothing could have really prepared for the magnitude that was Hurricane Dorian. And so now I invite Miss Pinder to share with us a bit about her personal experience with the storm.
Hi, everyone. It is so good to be here. Is my
Great to
audio
have
good?
you.
Wonderful. Mr. McIntosh, all of what you said is what we would have heard before. We figured we've done it with other storms, Francis, Jean, Matthew. And so my family decided that, we're going to stay at home and we're going to be safe. We can meet Dorian and, come out alive. But at a particular point, we realized that that decision to stay in our house was really not a good decision. Dorian, like you've reiterated, was a storm, a phenomenon that we just could not have ever imagined. And so my family and I, about 3 a.m. Sunday, that would have been Monday morning, we woke up to the ocean in our yard. it was just a sobering moment to see the actual ocean. You know, you understand that, okay, storms, they can bring wind, they bring rain, they can even bring a little bit of flooding. And you expected the water would just, you know, creep in. But no, it actually came in, rampaged through our entire house, and we were trapped in our roof watching it all take place. And so for about 36 hours, um, we just didn't know if we were going to survive. And, you know, I told God in that time, I said, if I make it out alive, I think this is something that the world needs to know about. This is something of epic proportion, and I will share your faithfulness to me, to my family, and that is why I wrote The Water Has Come. And so if you were to go through the book, you would see from the very beginning of our experience, actually to the point of our rescue. And so many people on that, they can attest. They can attest to the devastation. You know, we watched our home just get gutted. Everything that we owned, it was destroyed, you know, washed out to sea. And as my family, myself, my husband, my three children, three or four of my children, an aunt, and a cousin of mine who decided that he would ride out the storm over the bridge with us. As we, you know, loaded up some possessions and we went into the roof, we basically just prayed and hoped that, you know, it would subside. But for 12 long hours, Dorian went nowhere, you know, which was just never heard of before. That coupled with king tide, like Mr. McIntosh mentioned, it was unreal. It was totally unreal. And so our experience is one definitely for the books, hence the reason I wrote one.
So, Mr. McIntosh, based on the events of Hurricane Dorian, is anywhere in Grand Bahama really safe from these super floods?
Safe is, I guess, a relative term, you know. As you know, Grand Bahama has peaks and valleys. We call them hills and valley, low spots. And so it depends on the storm, you know. And I can't reiterate enough or emphasize enough for persons to not only listen to the wind speed or the category of the storm, but the surge. And the surge is just as deadly as the wind. And so, you know, when we heard of a possible 15-foot surge and and received pictures from Abaco, I think it was less than 12 hours before the impact into Freeport, we looked at them and we said, you know, we in trouble. And it's something obviously you have to take serious. But yes, there are high spots in Freeport, 30 feet, but it's all again relative to the storm itself. If you get 8-foot storm, we've had 8-foot storms, many of those 8-foot surge came into the island, and relatively most of the island is pretty much dry, with the exception of some cases along the north coast. But it all depends on the storm surge. When you speak about safe, I mean, the island is genuinely safe. Water can pretty much move on 0.5%. Any grade that's 0.5% or more, water rolls, downhill as the old saying goes. And so if that storm approached the island on the north coast versus the south coast, the elevation on that side of the island is a lot higher. And so again, it really depends. Every scenario I've experienced in the past has been different and presents us with different challenges. And so it's key, though, that our residents listen to the authorities. When information goes out, it's very, very important that they heed to those warnings. If they evacuate areas, persons have to listen.
It's quite useful information. We need to heed those warnings and take them seriously. I feel that going forward, in light of what has happened, residents will definitely heed the warnings if, God forbid, we happen to encounter something. For those persons who find themselves living in the flood zone, and we here in Grand Bahama know that even the shelters were compromised during Dorian. And of course, getting off of the island also posed an issue with ports as well, seaports and airports being closed. What are some recommendations would you make to persons who find themselves in this situation? And this is a question that I'll allow Mr. McIntosh to answer, and then I also would like to hear from Ms. Pinder.
Yeah, so the key thing is, and you said it, the key thing is knowing where you live, knowing the your environment, and knowing the topology, as we call it, of your area or your subdivision. And so on a regular rainy day, if you see, obviously the drains may be working 24 hours later, in some cases water is still ponding, or there's significant flooding just on a rainy day, then that is a sign or a sign that in the case of severe weather, like a Dorian, your area will be severely impacted. And so knowing is half the battle. So for example, persons in Queen's Cove know. Traditionally, if we have storms coming on the north coast of the island, that those are some of the areas that should be moved out first. Okay, other areas along the north coast we know um, under unusual under normal circumstances. Let's say normal. Let's say a Matthew, um, where obviously some areas on the north coast flooded, but it didn't come as far inland as Dorian did. Okay, and so key is knowing your environment, knowing and listening to the authorities. If the authorities say the entire north coast needs to move, or everyone in East End needs to move, that's important because they have information that the public may not readily be available to the public, and so that's really really key. Usually 24 hours before the impact of any storm, in some cases 48, your ports are usually closed. And so that's important for persons to know as well, that if a port is going to be closed at that period or the airport is going to be closed, then seeking alternative shelters or seeking alternative safety areas is going to be really, really important. And so we know persons don't like to congregate in these environments where there's large numbers of persons, particularly even now in the case of COVID. Um, it's going to be important for them to map these out, as you do with some of your precious documents. You safeguard them, you fill your cars. These are measures that you need to be aware of as well. Have a place that you could move that's um, either family member or well inland in the Freeport area, away from what you know to be an area that normally floods under normal circumstances. And again, the key is, and you're going to hear me say it quite a bit, understand and listen to that surge, because that becomes a extremely important factor, particularly if a storm stalls or slows down in the environment, the impact then becomes greater.
So, what advice would you give to persons who find themselves in such a compromising position whereby you have lost your home and all of these things, and right now it's just a matter of survival? What are some of the things that your family were able to do?
When we were in that very ominous situation, there was really nothing more that we can do other than pray, seek the advice of those who were not in such dire straits as we were in. We connected with multiple people just trying to organize our rescue. But the key in dangerous situations like that is really to remain calm. If you panic, you can make a mistake. If you panic, your sense of judgment could be clouded. You have to continue to think as clearly as possible. When I interviewed several characters for the book, a lot of them said, they were overcome with fear at some point, but they had to regain their composure and think, how am I going to make it out of this alive? What do I know that can help me to make a good decision right now? I would just give you an example. When we were in the roof, at one point we heard just the gushing water. This is when the ocean bypassed our door and was just filling up our house, filling up the house. My husband and my cousin, they went back down through the living room, through the hallway, to try to close the door to keep the ocean out. And after, quick thinking, they were like, no, we cannot stop this ocean. It will be more advantageous if we go to the back of the house and actually open the French doors to allow the water to flow out. Now, I don't know all of the science behind it, but I'm figuring if you just allow water to fill up your home, it would have eventually got to us in the roof. But by us opening the windows, opening the doors, it allowed an outlet for the water to flow through. And so you just have to be constantly thinking, okay, what am I going to do next? If this happens, what's going to happen next? What are we going to do? There was a point where the water was like just under our feet and we didn't know when it was going to stop rising. And so our next plan of action was, okay, if it comes to where we are in the roof, we're either going to have to break out. So my husband, he had a few tools. He was prepared to put a hole in the roof, and I was like, honey, no, I think we better wait. You don't want to compromise the roof so soon. But it was between climbing out through the roof, as some of the other characters in the book had to do for their survival, because they were, in a lower lying area, and so the ocean got even further up in their house. But it was either we were going to do that, or we had the ladder in the roof. We were like, okay, maybe we will all have to just stand on a step. It was just trying to think how we're going to get ahead of this thing. What are we going to do to make it? If you panic, you're not going to think straight, and so that is really my advice. But more so, be prayerful. Be prayerful. God will guide you and he will give you peace in those situations. That was a physical storm, but just as in emotional storms and other storms of life that we go through and we rely on God to be our support, our guide, it was the same way for us in the youth. And so my advice to people who, hopefully wouldn't find themselves in those situations. So my advice is actually to have a plan in place. We had a plan B to go to relatives, like Mr. McIntosh said. Map out an area where you can go to be safe. Understand your surroundings. We knew that hurricanes had come from the north are bad storms for us over the bridge, but we thought it was gonna run the south, so we decided to stay. But it's so important to have that plan in place and not don't test your fate, like just be safe. Just be safe. I know we always like to remain in the comfort of our own home. To go to somebody else's house is like an inconvenience. You have to pack up so many things. You have to be displaced on a couch. But believe you me, that would be so much better than, not knowing if you're even going to survive. And so always have your plan in place. And for those people who still have emotional scars that they're dealing with, because like I have a girlfriend, every time she hears about a hurricane, like it just brings on this feeling of anxiousness. And so her thing is, I need to get off the island, but we can't go anywhere, But under regular circumstances, I would say have your emergency funds available to buy your tickets and, go someplace else. If we don't have to go through the mental trauma of going through a hurricane, then don't, if you do not have to. And so that was my plan. I was like, hurricane hit, I'm going to take off. But like the Bible also says, we can make our plans, but it's God's will that, actually prevails. And so we're here, we're stuck. And so basically we just have to make the most of it and make wise decisions as best as possible.
Yes, great advice.
So I've been curious to know what you think would have been the impact of Hurricane Dorian had it run the southern side of the island as opposed to it being a north hurricane. I know you talked about there being no barriers in the north, and I even wrote about that in the book, how Dorian just had an all access class. There are no roots or anything to break it up. But for me, in my estimation, and I could be wrong, I'm thinking the south side has the deeper water in closer proximity. So I was just basically trying to figure out what would have been the difference in the enormity of the storm had it run south at Grand Bahama as opposed to the north.
Yeah, there's two scenarios. Initially, Dorian was projected to actually run the entire length of the island from, I guess, east to west. That was the initial projection that we got. If that had happened, we would have seen surge from the north, and
And
then
so,
the surge would have switched and come from the south, which would have been devastating to this island. Devastating. Because of the strength of Dorian, because of the projected surge. And the surge is what would have made it so devastating, along with the king tides, along with the wind speed of a Cat 5. Um, that is what would have changed the game for this entire island. Every single building would have been affected to some degree or the other. The northern side, as you know, obviously would have gotten more water because the terrain or the elevation is lower. The south side is a lot higher, but areas like Fortune Key, those areas would have been impacted, and would have experienced possibly 3, 4 feet of water. And so that was not the best scenario. Now that was what was projected. If it had solely passed to the south, you still would have had the same effect where initially you got the winds coming out of the northeast, and so the north side of the island would have gotten impacted with flood. And then eventually the southern part would have been impacted, but it wouldn't have been as severe if it was entirely on the south coast of the island. As you could remember, I think it was, I'm not sure if it's Francis or Jean, which was on the south side island, but it wasn't as strong and the surges weren't as high. And so you would have seen cases, I think in one of those storms, I mean, I came down, I think it was Francis, where graves would have came up, or coffins would have came out of the graveyard because those areas was flooded in Pinder's Point and Lewis Yard. You would have had similar experiences with that, in addition to the fact that you would have had some structural damages because of the strength of the storm as well. And so the degree of flooding would have been less on the southern side, but you still would have had a surmountable impact because of the strength of the storm and because of the potential surge of the storm. And then keep in mind, um, when you look at Abaco and what was happening there, um, two-story buildings were impacted, severely impacted, and so because these things are such a phenomenon, when it gets to the point that Dorian did, uh, areas that you suspect wasn't going to be greatly impacted were, and so the tool that we use to predict and project is just that, a tool that guides us to potential impact, and it's not in a 3D sense where we've been able to map from in the history. Okay, based on this storm, you projected this level of flooding. We have not been able to do that in the past. Now we were able to capture some of it in Dorian. So what you're hoping as we go forward, we could say in certain areas, based on the surge, based on the strength, tidal occurrences, this is what we could project to occur. And it helps. It helps us with information to really guide residents and the authorities as well.
nice. Thank you for that.
Mr. McIntosh, what impact did the aftermath of Dorian have on the work of your department?
Oh, it was tremendous. It was grueling. In fact, we're still dealing with it. As recent as last week, we were able to, with assistance of the government, and particularly the DRA, we're able to get partnerships, and we were able to bring in again third parties to help with the cleanup. And so last week, we were able to fully clean the Freeport proper area. I think some of them are still working in the Lukai area, but the Freeport proper area is pretty much back to normal, where service provider, sanitation services, is able to now service 23 subdivisions. With Dorian, what we found, what occurred with all of the backlog, the clearing, the cleaning, the repairs, under normal circumstances, we're able to service 23 subdivisions in 2 days, which is under my portfolio. With the cleanup, it took us 2 days just to service one subdivision, and that went on for 10 months. So person saw a 7-week delay, a 8-week delay, a 12-week delay in debris removal. and it was really structure. Our traffic lights, those were damaged and had to be replaced. And those items are not those back in place. And it was just a tremendous thing. The other aspect of this was building repairs. For instance, wanting to get their power turned on, of course, first they have to do the repairs. Once the repair comes in by a licensed electrician or GBPA licensed electrician, that is then verified. Our inspector goes out to verify that. They get a document, they take it to GB Power. Because GB Power will not turn on your power once you have been impacted by more than X amount of water below your receptacles. And so again, we had to bring in additional assistants, electricians to help with this mass inspection that needed to be done once persons have completed their repairs. And so that was a frustration by residents because, um, it just was a daunting task, and working with the NGOs that came in to make sure that the remediation is being done, to make sure that the debris is placed not over water meters on the power lines. All of this just to make sure that what's happening is seamless, even though residents didn't think it was going fast enough. This was we tried to explain to them that this was an unusual case. This was in a Matthew, where within a year we were able to get up and running. Matthew, we moved about 5,000 truckloads of debris. Up to last week, we were up to 100,000 tons of debris, which equate to 25,000 truckloads. I mean, if that's something to bat your eye at, I mean, it is because it was a tremendous amount of effort that had to go into getting to where we are today. And we're still not there. We believe more than 2,000, 2,500 cars were destroyed. And so we then run into situations where the usual junkyards were filled. And so GBPA had to step in once we found this out and to look at where do we place this location for storage of vehicles until they can be exported off the island. We then committed to 6 acres of land in the civic industrial area on Thackeray Street, working with a licensee to make sure this could happen. But vehicles sat on the verge for a while until we could figure this out and sort this out because you can't place those vehicles anywhere. And so, as recent as last week, Friday, we were able to, I think we're up to about 1,500 vehicles that has been moved from strategic areas around the city. We still have some work to do in that regard, but it's tremendous. We're hoping it doesn't take 5 times the effort to get back to a sense of normalcy. With all hands on deck, we're hoping that within hopefully less than 2 years, we're able to get back to a sense of normalcy. But the effort has been great. The impact has been great, and resources obviously has been strained.
Yes, the work of your department is definitely to be commended. Also considering the fact that the workers themselves would have been greatly impacted by the
Correct.
storm itself.
That's true, and we've had employees who have lost their homes, who lived over the bridge, and homes have been totally destroyed. One of my colleagues, his family, he and his families were at their home. They have a two-story building. They were upstairs. Luckily, they had a two-story, and they went upstairs. And but it was him and 4 kids and his wife. And so that was a tough situation for him. Didn't know whether or not he could get out of that, and he had 11 feet of water in his home. He didn't know if he would survive, if they would survive, and we tried to rescue, but when we got onto Fortune Bay Drive, the water was deeper than our machines were able to handle. And so he had to sit it out until, we were able to get to him, the water receded a bit, and we were able to go there and rescue him. But it was traumatic for months, if I can say, for him and for the kids themselves. But they have championed the cause and came up to the line and have been working ever since to make sure residents are able to get back to normalcy and
Okay,
to bring
so
to them.
wow, even based on what Mr. McIntosh shared, And reading Mrs. Pinder's book, The Water Has Come, just hearing that imagery and everything come alive again, it gives you goosebumps. I know, Mrs. Pinder, you visited Abaco, the other island devastated by Dorian. How has that experience been? Did that represent something different for you?
Going to Abaco was such a rewarding experience for me. Maybe I shouldn't say rewarding because of the devastation that they would have experienced, but for me, it just really solidified the fact that we were spared in Grand Bahama. We had loss of life for the first time in any hurricane, but our loss of life could not even compare to the alleged loss of life in Abaco. And so seeing that island, it was very sobering. It totally destroyed their business center. The residential area, I mean, I was just in awe. For me, it seemed as though the storm kind of like lifted out of the sea and just covered Marsh Harbor. Yeah, so for me, seeing Abaco, the destruction was just to another level. I saw buildings that were lifted completely off of the foundation and placed some 100 meters in a different direction. It was just something that you cannot explain. Their loss of life, as we know, was possibly far worse than Grand Bahama. So going there for me was just a need to see where it all began. It ended with us, but I wanted also to get a visual of what the storm would have looked like going, into Marsh Harbor. And so I was very grateful to have met several of the people who did survive. A lot of them still not ready to talk about it. There are some people who have left Abaco and vowed they would never return. It was just that bad. I met a father who said he was asleep in his home. His daughter was on his chest. And when he woke up, he was still in his chair, but his chair was outside and he was underwater. And he had to fight with his daughter in his hand to get above the surge. I cannot really understand how that could happen, but I know it did, but he wasn't prepared to share too much in detail just because it's a difficult place for a lot of people to go. And so I even appreciated, just the little bit of talking that we were able to do. But they definitely have some stories in Abaco. And I'm really praying that they would write it, or they would get someone else to pen their stories, because these are stories that the world just, it could not have happened in vain. And, just to happen and that is the end of it. And I think we all need to share it. We need to learn from it. It's a part of our testimonies. So Abaco is for sure a very important part of my journey through my healing process in dealing with Hurricane Dorian.
Wow, this has been powerful. Even though it has been an entire year, the influence, the impact is surely there, and our lives, particularly in the Northern Bahamas, will never ever be the same. And so, Mr. McIntosh, are there any final words you would like to leave with our viewers today?
Um, a few. One being for us to, again, always listen to the advice of the authorities, because there may be some information that's not in the domain of the public that the authorities may have, because it's for the sanctity and safeguard of life. Life is always important. So whatever we can do to contribute to ensure that people are safe, we do so from our side of the Grand Bahama Port Authority. And it's really important for persons to be prepared, and wherever the information is, try to access. We have a helpline, 24-hour helpline, 352-2000. If persons have concerns during a approaching tropical system, or a approaching storm, to call those numbers. And we will provide you with information as best as we possibly can. And so it's very important during the season, hurricane season, that persons are prepared. Their homes are prepared. It's also important that at least 36 hours before persons don't put debris out, but the anticipation that the service provider will move it, because at that point it's really, really too late. Those persons need to go home and secure their premises and to be safe as well. And then once the storm is past, GBP or LOSCO may assist with the removal, but that's usually for limited time of construction debris. And so it's important for residents to know that it is not the obligation of the Port Authority or DEFCO or LOSCO to move that construction debris, but to ensure that the contractor added as a part of their scope to make sure it's moved. And no, we want to make sure all persons are involved, all hands are on deck to keep the city as beautiful as it is. And so that will only happen if all hands are on deck and persons not sit or wait or place debris for someone else to move it, but to have a plan B. That is the contractor or some other person who come and move that, because we're in the business of moving your bulk trash, but it's not inclusive of construction debris. And so again, we want persons between June and the 31st of November to be safe, to always be vigilant, and always listen out to the authorities as it relates to approaching storms, because the information that you hear could be the information that just save your life, and that's really important.
And so, Mrs. Pinder, can you share some final words with us as well, including information on how viewers can get their hands on your book?
Yes, I would just definitely like to agree with everything that Mr. McIntosh would have just said. It is about survival. You have to make wise decisions. And ultimately, for me, it's just about trusting God. I cannot be remiss and not say that keeping faith in God definitely changes things. Being prayerful changes things. And so I have penned many words about our experience and about really what it has done for my faith in The Water Has Come. That is available on Amazon as a ebook as well as a paperback. It is available in Grand Bahama at Bellevue Gifts or Bethel Booksellers. It is available in Nassau at Logos. I'm working on another location as well there. And also in Abaco at Fruits of the Vine Christian Bookstore. And so I'm trying to get it throughout the islands. People are definitely asking for it. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone that has supported the book, that has given outstanding reviews. It really boosted my confidence. It made me feel like, okay, maybe I do have a gift. Maybe I can, really do this writing thing. And so I just want to encourage other people who have a story, write your story. You went through it to be able to help someone else. And so definitely, and to my young people, my favorite kind of people, children, teenagers, this is a time that you can be writing your experience as well. We're going through COVID, journal every day. What has this experience been like for you? And any other situation that you would go through in life, write it, and we will want to read it. And so thank you, Joretta. This has been wonderful. Talking about Dorian is always therapy for me. So I do appreciate the opportunity.
So here you have it. The Water Has Come. It's available at Amazon and also at the bookstores mentioned in Freeport as well as Nassau. I'd like to thank once again my guests, Mrs. Keldra Pinder, author of The Water Has Come, and also Mr. Troy McIntosh, City Manager at the Grand Bahama Port Authority here in Freeport, Grand Bahama. We'd also like to dedicate, I don't want to cry. We at RBNTV Studios would also wish to dedicate this episode to all of the family and loved ones of those who lost their lives when the hell and the high water came as a result of Hurricane Dorian. And for those of us that are still here, no matter what part of the world you may be in, just remember that come hell or high water, you have what it takes to move successfully, full steam ahead. Thank you once again to my wonderful guests, Mr. Troy McIntosh and Mrs. Keldra Pinder. Until next time.
You're watching RBNTV. We are networking, promoting, we're scoring points for you, proclaiming, declaring, here to encourage you, no matter the problem.